What's up guys, and welcome back to another YouTube video. In this video I want to focus on the squat, and I want to share with you guys a few tips to help improve my squat to take it from 551 pounds all the way to over 660 pounds. And as usual, without wasting any more time, let's just jump right into the video. So the first thing we need to go over are some of the mechanics involving the unrack. One small aspect of it that doesn't get talked about enough is the actual rack height. The height of the rack, regardless of whether you're high bar or low bar, should be at a point where you can comfortably clear the rack without needing to raise your heels. The habit of raising your heels can be so subtle that you usually don't even realize you're doing it until you try to unrack heavy weights and wonder why you keep clipping the J-hooks. This is why it's important to have the J-hooks at a level slightly below your shoulders. That way you can easily just squeeze your glutes to pop the bar off the rack and walk it out. Also, another benefit to the slightly lower rack height is that it allows you to mold yourself much better onto the bar. This helps a lot with keeping your upper back tight during the setup, while also reinforcing the importance of keeping everything else in your body tight during the walkout. And this leads us to the next part about the unrack, which is the walkout. You want to make sure you keep your legs as locked as possible when walking the weight back. What this does is make the weight feel much lighter on your back while helping you maintain stability as you get into your squat position. The looser your legs are on the unrack, the heavier the weight is going to feel on your back and the more unstable you'll be while you set up for your squat. This next important tip has to do with the descent of the squat. Most people are so accustomed to the technique of quickly dive bombing into the hole in order to catch a stretch reflex at the bottom, but over time this can actually cause problems with the way that you squat. There's much less stability in comparison to a more controlled descent. This is why it's important to really engage your quads during the descent and go at a slower pace. There's two main benefits to doing this. One, it allows you to be much more in control of the weight, especially once you reach the hole. And two, it makes it much easier to be aware of where your hips are in regards to judging your depth. You have to make sure you're in control throughout the movement though. Don't just control the weight, then lose tension in the hole. Keep your tension throughout the entirety of the movement, even with the heavy rep work. One really helpful cue I learned a while ago was to imagine a golf ball sitting at the top of my knee while I descend into a squat. If I can get my hips low enough for the ball to be able to roll down my quads and into my hips, then I know that the depth is good enough and I don't need to keep descending any lower. Now this final tip has to do with the stability of your upper body. Being mindful of where your elbows are in relation to your torso, both during the descent and the ascent of your squat, makes a huge difference. That's why it's important to not have your elbows too far back at any point during a squat. It puts you in a position to lose stability and get pitched forward. Not only that, but your entire body gets put into a position that makes it much harder to generate force back into the bar on the way back up as well. The fix for this is to focus on driving the elbows forward on the descent without losing your upper back tightness in order to maintain a more upright or neutral position. Of course, your personal anatomy will dictate the extent to how upright you can be, but the general idea behind doing this is to keep your body from being thrown forward, especially if your hips start to shoot back when coming out of the hole. Think of the elbow drive as a cue to help keep your torso much more rigid and stacked both on the way down and back up. Now let's recap all of these tips with the example of a heavy single. The first thing is to be mindful of your rack height. It doesn't have to be drastically lower, but even going down just one notch can help you wedge yourself into the bar much better by forcing you to keep everything in your body tight in order to make sure that the heavier weights feel much lighter on your back, especially once the bar starts to whip as you unrack and walk backwards. Notice how after I get into position, I stand tall with my legs and glutes locked. Don't try to hinge back before the descent. You want to make sure everything is as stacked and rigid as possible before you start the descent. Now on the way down, drive your elbows forward and down. Think external rotation without losing the shelf of your rear delts or overextending your back. Keep the torso as rigid as possible and your quads engaged as you control the descent just low enough to get your hip crease below the knee, then drive the weight back up. So hopefully these tips were helpful, and if powerlifting or bodybuilding is your thing, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for the next one.